In June 2026, 73,000 Fortinet firewall devices failed, simultaneously across 194 countries. As we see in this visualization, nodes representing global network infrastructure suddenly go dark. This image shows the NATO headquarters in Brussels. During the collapse, adversaries used compromised firewalls to actively exfiltrate classified documents from a defense contractor tied to this specific facility. Organizations spend millions of dollars on enterprise firewalls to secure their internal networks. In this event, those exact security appliances acted as the primary entry points used to dismantle them. The 2026 collapse represents the final link in a chain of overlooked warnings, legacy cryptographic debt, and systemic configuration failures. The timeline starts in late 2022. This diagram illustrates a vulnerability inside the firewall's operating system, known as a heap-based buffer overflow. A fixed memory container receives too much data, and the excess spills over to overwrite adjacent system commands. Nation-state operators weaponized this overflow to bypass standard defenses. Following a series of industry-wide patches, many organizations assumed the vulnerability had been neutralized, but adversaries had already deployed COATHANGER, a stealthy remote access trojan. As depicted in this sequence, the malware hooks deep into system calls, allowing it to survive complete reboots and firmware updates. By December 2024, the situation forced an extreme directive at companies like GE Vernova. Software updates were no longer effective. Operators had to physically rip out and replace the compromised hardware to ensure network integrity. Applying patches over an infected operating system creates a fragile state of security. Once the hardware layer is compromised, the device itself remains an untrusted asset, regardless of its software version. In late 2025, Fortinet attempted to harden security. As this diagram shows, they upgraded from a weak, single-layer SHA-256 hash to PBKDF2, a thick, multi-layered encryption block that requires massive computational power to crack. But there was a structural flaw in the upgrade logic. The new PBKDF2 encryption only applied to accounts where the administrator actively logged in after the firmware update. Dormant user accounts remained entirely unsecured. For backward compatibility, the system silently preserved the weak SHA-256 hashes of every user. Shifting the perspective underneath the architecture, we find a hidden old password folder inside the configuration backups. At the same time, attackers discovered a cross-tenant authentication bug in the FortiCloud single sign-on service. This allowed them to use legitimate credentials from one environment to assume control over unrelated organizations. Storing vulnerable hashes in hidden files alongside compromised federated trust meant that even meticulously patched systems carried the exact credentials needed for their own destruction. These vulnerabilities culminated in June 2026 with an operation called FortiBleed. Attackers systematically targeted exposed firewalls and extracted the configuration backups containing those hidden legacy hashes. This diagram represents the Hastopolis cracking operation. Dozens of parallel GPU nodes fired simultaneously, breaking down the weak SHA-256 hashes into plaintext at an industrial scale. This pie chart reveals the results of the decryption process. 63% of the exposed credentials were default system accounts, or generic words like admin and system. Armed with those passwords, the threat actors executed over 1.16 billion automated login attempts, resulting in the total collapse of perimeter networks worldwide. Industrialized hash cracking converted 6 in 10 firewalls into accessible entry points, the direct result of organizations failing to rename the default admin account. Government agencies responded with emergency directives. Organizations were ordered to instantly terminate active sessions and physically sever compromised firewall hardware from the public internet. In the immediate aftermath, copycat threat actors flooded criminal forums, auctioning off the cracked VPN datasets and extorting victims with ransom demands reaching $2 million. Meanwhile, the original adversaries used the valid identities to move past the network boundary and embed directly into internal domain controllers. Securing the perimeter firewall provided the authenticated access required to establish permanent residency within critical internal infrastructure. Applying a software patch for a zero-day vulnerability offers a surface-level fix. It does nothing to resolve the toxic technical debt accumulated over years of poor configuration management. The most sophisticated firewall hardware is entirely neutralized the moment an administrator fails to enforce multi-factor authentication and rotate default passwords. The collapse of 194 countries' defenses proves that the most sophisticated security architecture is irrelevant if its primary lock is never changed by the people paid to secure it.